In conversation with Don Johnson. Don Johnson, the author of Living a Conscious Life, is a former monk and business leader turned writer and executive coach. His spiritual quest began as a college student and led him on a 10-year journey where he lived in ashram and taught meditation in North America, Europe, Africa, and Australia. In his 30s, he left the ashram, started a family and a career in the leadership development industry, where he provided training and coaching to leaders in Fortune 500 companies. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to offer the show today, Don Johnson. Welcome on the show, Don.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to be here with you.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, really. Thanks for coming on. It's quite amazing. We're going to be having a lovely conversation around your beautiful title. Yeah, yeah. So, Don, I want to first say that I enjoyed reading through the description page of your book, Living a Conscious Life, How to Find Peace, Wholeness, and Freedom in a Chaotic World in Amazon. And I am particularly intrigued by the love of the depth of its subtitle, How to Find Peace, Wholeness, and Freedom in a Chaotic World. I would like to ask you how this book came about. What inspired you to write A Conscious Life, and how did it come with a subtitle too?
Okay, yeah, sure. Um, the book came about as a result of my writing that began during the COVID lockdown in 2020.
Mm,
And I began to write on the platform called medium.com that you may be
yeah,
familiar with, right?
absolutely.
And, you know, I started writing on that platform. And, as you know, you there's an opportunity to get interaction with your readers.
Mm,
And what started happening simply was, I started writing, and I'd always dabbled in writing in my earlier years.
mm,
But having this platform was quite interesting. So I just started getting feedback from the readers that really said, "Hey, we're enjoying what you're writing. It's very inspirational. It's helpful." And I was writing about personal growth. I was writing about communication skills. I was writing about meditation. I was writing about relationships. I was writing about just lessons learned, basically, through the
mm,
course of my life. And as that continued, I looked at the feedback and I thought, well, maybe there's an opportunity here to put together a lot of what I've written and combine it into a book.
mm.
And kind of one thing led to the next, and I met someone who was like a writing coach, and they helped me kind of put together maybe I took maybe 50 or 60 articles that I had written
Wow.
and tried to find some common themes between them and organize them into sections. And we just started to think about the fact that I think there's a book here, basically.
Wow.
And it just came that way. I just said, you know what, I think this might be fun to do. And
Absolutely.
then it continued to evolve from there. And getting the title, that was one of the hardest parts, actually.
Wow.
Uh, we really struggled with it. Like, what do we call this thing? Because it's a compilation of tools, inspirational stories, lessons learned.
Mm,
Um, but we kind of landed on this notion of being conscious because I'd been, I've been practicing meditation and mindfulness for many years.
wow.
And that concept is one of the more that you pay attention, you can be present. And the more that you're present, the more conscious you are. The
Mm,
more the more conscious you are, the better choices one can make, etc. So we kind of, long story short, we kind of landed on this living a conscious life as the title, and then the subtitle came later. So
oh, wow.
mm,
That's quite interesting to know, really. I quite enjoy you talking about how the book came to be and what inspired the making of it. And if you have a copy of it there with you, I'd
I
like you to
do.
show to the camera just so it's what it
I
looks
do. I
like.
do.
Beautiful
This is
cover.
it.
Oh, interesting. I love the cover, really.
Thank you.
And your
Yeah,
name is
we
in full, India, Donald Hill Johnson.
Donald, yeah, my I use my full name there because the name Don Johnson, for people that are have watched a lot of TV, they there's an actor named Don Johnson, and
Yeah,
many times that that name can get lost in the shuffle if I use that name. So I decided better to use my full name.
interesting. Yeah, thank you. Now, for
Yeah,
readers who haven't read the book yet, I know you've talked a bit about it, but then I still like to ask you, for readers
yeah,
who haven't read the book yet, and of course, without giving much information away, did we have a
yeah,
sneak of what you had expect in terms of themes, in terms of
yeah,
subject lines, picking up, the book?
yeah,
Also, yeah, picking up the book. Let's go with that first of all.
yeah. No, yeah, it's a good question. So the umbrella or the overview would be the book it's a personal development book and
Yeah.
it's personal growth. It's got themes of um, there's practical tools about communicating with other people to build strong relationships. There's themes of
Mm,
meditation and spirituality. There's things
mm,
about living a more fulfilling life. There's a theme about navigating the business world. Like, just for example, some titles of the articles, for example, wisdom begins when you ask this one question. 4 steps to being honest, even when it's hard. Avoid stupid arguments with verbal Aikido. How to be a more interesting conversationalist. 5 signs you're making the most of your life. Um, the importance of feminine energy in a male dominated world.
wow.
Um, the power and beauty of meditation. How to get deeper meaning in work and life. Things like that. So
Interesting.
yeah, you can kind of see where it's going from those examples, I think.
Yeah, that's a I even like the fact that you read out that part. That's a very beautiful subtitle you've got in there. I particularly love before you mentioned meditation and spirituality, which is very important. I'm a huge fan of books in this particular genre or that expand on this particular themes. And also navigating a business growth, very important for everyone. Yeah, be it an entrepreneur, a business owner, a startup
Hmm.
company owner, etc. And also very important thing that I think we all need is the practical tools about communicating with people. Very, very important. Yeah, because it helps to build networking and communication is a very good skill that everyone needs to have.
Hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning. That's a beautiful one you've got there.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit of everything, I guess you could say. As a reviewer on, I think a reviewer from Publishers Weekly when the book came out said it's a it's a motley array of wisdom
Oh,
from a colorful life. And I said,
interesting.
it is. It's like a patchwork quilt.
Wow.
There's different pieces, but life is not just one thing, as you know. Life is many different aspects. We have many
Yeah.
different aspects to our life.
Mm,
We're emotional creatures, we're physical creatures, we're mental creatures, we're spiritual creatures. So, in order to have a fulfilling life, the idea behind the book was all of them need to work together.
absolutely. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing. That's very beautiful to know. And also, I know we've mentioned a bit about this too, but I'd like us to transition a bit. Your book weaves together wisdom, humor, simple exercises, and daily practices, and provocative questions to provide a read that is accessible, entertaining, easy to identify with, and profoundly effective. How were you able to blend these teams together? I like to have your take on that.
I don't know how well I actually blended them together, but
Yeah.
they hang together like individual paintings on a wall. I think that's the way I would look at it and
Mm.
say,
Wow.
yeah, just they talk about different elements and different elements of our life, and I think the thread that weaves them together is
Mm.
this, um, is the fact that when we live our lives from the inside out,
Yeah.
we have more opportunities to perform better, to function better. What I mean by that is this. I believe there's 2 games to play in life. One is an
Mm.
inner game, and one is an outer game. And, many great people have said, and not just me, I didn't
Mm.
make this up. They say when you get the inner game right, the outer game takes care of itself. So
Mm,
what's the inner game? That's really the question. What's the inner game? To me, the inner game is paying attention and being aware of your own inner state, your thoughts, your
mm,
feelings, your reactions, managing your triggers. It's being an observer to your thoughts and realizing that we're not our thoughts. Thoughts are
mm.
like a passing is behind that is something else. We're consciousness,
Absolutely.
you know? So the more that we identify with our true self, the more that we can manage these other parts of ourselves, our thoughts,
Mm,
our feelings, etc. So playing the inner game sets us up to win the outer game, to be more
mm,
effective, to be more conscious. So that's the that's the way that I would see how does this all hang together is that everything that I talk about kind of fits together in that there's pieces on the inner game and then there's also pieces on the outer game, which would be how we speak, how we show up, how we behave.
mm.
Those are
Wow.
all outer manifestations of our inner world. So it's
Oh,
the
wow.
it's the inner world, that, Peter, that I think, makes the difference between peace, happiness, or frustration and sadness and misery. It's all starts from inside us.
Hmm. Interesting. I love your take on that. Very, very amazing, very wholesome. And I love the fact that you're able to blend all of these things together in a smooth, lovely, and a way that transition from one chapter to another. Beautiful to know. Thank you so much, Don. Yeah, thanks
You're
for
welcome.
sharing. Now, apart
Yeah.
from living a conscious life, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
Um, the thing that I'm working on, Peter, is related to some of the things in the book. And
Wow.
the project that I'm working on is, as you mentioned earlier, when I was in my 20s, I was introduced to an Indian guru who taught meditation, basically, ancient techniques of
Oh,
meditation,
oh,
right?
wow.
And and I followed that person for 10 years, and I lived
Wow.
as a monk in various community housing groups throughout the United States called ashrams. Ashram
Wow.
means ashram means shelter in Hindi, and it's a place where people go to focus on their spiritual world.
Mm,
And I got involved in that because I wanted to work for the guru. His mission was to bring peace to the world, one person at a time, through helping people experience peace within. And everything, okay, all well and good. That's a great setup. But what happened was uh, when I left the ashram when I was 33,
yeah.
I began my career in the business world, and eventually when the internet came about in the late 90s, um, somebody that I worked for who was very close to the guru started writing about what was really going on behind the scenes.
Mm,
And it was far from what was going on the stage. So there was the public display of what this teacher was doing and what
yeah.
he stood for. And then there was his private life, which was shambolic. It was
Mm,
shambles. Um, and without going into a lot of detail, let me suffice it to say that basically what I realized and found out, along with a whole bunch of other people, was that he was very fraudulent and did not live a life of integrity, was not a good leader, and
mm,
basically created a lot of deception that brought people in, and he he
wow.
became a multimillionaire on the
Wow.
backs of people that trusted him. So
Oh, wow.
I'm telling you this because the project that I'm working on now is to bring the true story of his nefarious behavior to the public.
Mm,
And we're exploring various ways to do that. We're working with various documentarians in the US and in the UK that are exploring the possibility of a documentary to tell the true story about really what was going on.
mm,
And I'm also working with a individual who is a very well-known author, and we're discussing the possibility of writing a book
wow.
about this individual whose name is Prem Rawat formerly known as Guru Maharaji, came to the
Yeah.
West when he was 13 years old.
Wow.
Um, and I came to your country in 1979, Nigeria, to meet with people who were his followers and speak on his behalf. And I toured, I was in Ghana, I was in Nigeria, I was in Cameroon, uh, Kenya, Egypt, Tanzania, and I was there on, recruiting people be part of this cult, but it turned out it was a cult. So we're hoping that we can get some publicity and shed some light on this situation
It's
that's really quite tragic. Actually,
it's a
a lot of
popular
people were
thing
helped,
here, Guru Maharaji. I've heard
and
that
a
too
lot of
many
people
times,
were
yeah.
harmed. I don't know if got quite a following in Ghana, to some degree in Nigeria, maybe Senegal. I don't know all the countries
Mm.
where he's got presence, but there is a following in Africa for sure. So, so that's my project, Peter.
Wow. That's amazing, really. It's quite amazing to know about your ancient techniques of meditation and to know you spent 10 years with that. Also lived as a monk. That's a
Hmm.
lot, really, Don.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's not everybody's lived like a monk when they were in their 20s, and I wouldn't necessarily
Wow, you
recommend
can
it.
imagine.
Yeah, it
Wow.
was an interesting time, Peter.
Wow.
There's a lot of reasons for that. When you go back to that t period of time in history, the 70s and time of revolution, time of spirituality, time of,
Mm,
exploring and counterculture and so forth. Lots of gurus were all around at that time. So
interesting. Oh, wow. That's quite amazing to know, really. And I can go on and on and on, not just for the sake of the time, yeah?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Now, that's what I'd like to ask you, Don. Could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? I know that with different authors, the experiences differs, especially if you're writing in different genre. For someone writing in the theme of poetry, it might be a bit different. For someone writing the genre of memoir, it might be different.
Hmm.
For someone writing science fiction, fantasy, historical fiction, all of that, it differs
Yeah.
from one person to another. But then I'd like to ask you, what could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? Are there any challenges you've encountered in the process of writing your book, in the process of collating the works together, and also ever since we got published?
Yeah, the publishing, I just wrote an article on Medium about this is what happens after you sign a publishing deal.
Mm,
And it was basically what I said in the article was I'm super glad and super happy that I was able to find a publisher that wanted my book. Um,
well,
so very grateful for that. It was an independent publisher out of New York City, a
mm,
small family-run business. So they're not a big publishing house, but the people that run the place came out of big publishing, so they know what they're doing. Um, but I invested as a writer to get my
mm,
book ready for a publisher. I put I put a lot of work into it, but I also got a lot of help from good editors to get it in great shape.
yeah,
So I invested a lot of my own money in that to get it to the publisher. So if you're going to go the publishing route, you've got to know that. I also had to pay an agent to help me introduce me to publishers. There's a lot of steps, a lot of things go on.
mm,
So I would say be prepared. If you're going to go after a publisher, you're probably going to have to put some of your own money into the pot, to get
yeah,
it there, right? And then after the when the book got published,
yeah,
then it was a matter, well, how are you going to market the book? And
mm,
so we go on podcasts like I'm doing now. I hired a social media team to help promote the book on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. We
mm,
created short videos. There was a lot of work to do, on that. Um, and again, I'm putting some of my own money into that pot. The publisher's also putting money into that pot too. So, very few people get a big publishing deal, particularly if you're an unknown author. It's just
yeah,
rare.
yeah,
And one has to go into this knowing you're not going into it to make money off of your book.
Mm.
Um, it, most books don't make money. Most books, very few books make big money. So that to me was, I was very clear about that before I did this because
Wow.
I went into this knowing, I said, I'm doing this because I love writing and I
Okay.
want to see what it's like to go into the publishing world, but I'm
Mm.
not doing this to make money. Not at all. If that's my goal, I'll probably wind up being miserable. I'm doing it for the love of the art, you know,
Mm.
and so I'm quite happy with what's happening. I love going on podcasts. I host my own podcast. I meet great
Interesting.
people. I meet people like you. It's great. It's lovely. That's what it's like.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens after this. Do I write another book? Do I not? We don't know. But I did say in my article, if I do write another book,
Yeah.
I'm not convinced I would go the publishing route, an external publisher. I would seriously consider self-publishing. I really would.
Wow.
So
Interesting.
I'm not there yet. We'll see what happens, but I think both are good options. It just
Yeah.
depends on what the writer, wants to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, wow. I love your take on this. I love your answer to this particular question. Sounds to me very educative, very inspiring as well. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And now, before we wrap up for today, is there anything that you would love to show all the viewers about your books that we did not mention in this interview and you'd love the viewers to know? Is there anything?
What else about the book? Uh, I could read a little piece of, one
That
little
would be
bit,
great.
maybe
Yeah,
one little piece of it,
yeah.
just to give the readers a flavor. Let me change glasses from the podcasting glasses to the reading
The
glasses.
reading glasses.
They're slightly different. Okay. This is a short blurb from a chapter called Lessons from Black Holes.
Okay.
The answers are in the darkness. Um, and I'm going to read this a piece here. It says, living in the here and now is the key to greater peace of mind. The past is gone. There is no future and there is no fear. When we give up waiting for the future, we realize the present moment is perfect and has everything we need.
Hmm.
The space within us that wants more is filled. This is where peace is, in the present. The past is gone, there is no future, and there is no fear. Every day I ask myself, where will I focus my energy? I can't change most things around me, but what I do with my time and attention is mine.
Hmm.
I get to choose how I show up and who I will be on any given day. I opt to face my fears or bury them through distraction.
Hmm.
I decide if I'll be a black hole, sucking the life out of myself and those around me, or if I'll be someone who shines brightly. I'll read a couple more sentences, then I'll finish. When we live from the inside out, we can more easily find our true selves. We're less consumed with continually plugging ourselves into the world. We let ourselves take time to reflect and recharge, and as a result, we're less distracted.
Hmm.
We can more easily see our fears, large and small. Fear doesn't come from being in the light, it comes from being in the dark. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Write everything down. I'll bet you'll find one common thread, the future.
Wow. Oh,
So,
wow. That is very amazing, very deep. Yeah, and I find it a bit to be philosophical as well. Like you mentioned, in the past, it's gone. There is no future and there is no fear. Face my fear or bury them to distractions. That's quite an amazing word in there that I've able to catch up with. And reading it is actually something very deep, really. I mean, yeah, you mentioned meditation, so now I can understand, yeah, because it's very amazing. It's one you have to read and pause, digest it, understand it before you move to the next line. That's very interesting, really. Thanks for sharing.
yeah, yeah, Peter, thank you. Yeah.
Very impressive, really. I love you talking about that. Thanks for reading, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I'd like to have your take on this. I love to have your advice, just in case we have for other writers who are struggling with publishing, writing a book. What would you advise people in this category for struggling writers? What advice you've got for them?
Well, it depends what they're struggling with. Somebody I read something on Medium some years ago, and somebody said you've got to chunk the different parts of writing. So, for
Mm,
example, what they meant was so that there's a time of idea generation, and so that's a chunk. How do you get your ideas, for writing? Then there's the writing part itself, just
mm,
grinding it out, doing the writing. Then there's the editing part. So sometimes as writers, we sit down and we think we need to do all three at once. And it can be a bit overwhelming because
mm,
where do you start? So when I read that, I thought, that's really good advice because there's some days, some weeks, maybe even months when just focus on generating ideas. Like, and I'll talk more about how do you do that if we have time in a moment. But chunking it helped me. I said, great. There's times when I just have to just sort of write ideas, write them in my notebook, gather little bits of paper, pay
mm,
attention to things, read other people's work, just gather ideas. And then I have them all in one place. I have them, in a book, or I have them in a file, or I have them in a notepad, whatever they are, just different
mm.
bits and pieces of ideas. And then there's the writing part. Then maybe I sit down to do some writing. Maybe I pick
Wow.
one and I go with it. And then maybe later I do the editing. Sometimes I write and edit at the same time, but chunking it can be helpful. And one of your other questions I think you either asked or was in your document was, well, how do you get your ideas? And how do you get the content, for a
Inspiration.
book,
Yeah.
right? And for me, I would say this. A lot of what's in my book are stories. I tell stories about my life, and then I talk about the lessons that I've learned through the
Mm,
stories and try to make them very practical for the reader. Like, here's tools that you can take away or things like that.
mm,
The other way that I get my ideas is it's kind of like channeling, or it's kind of like, well, let me put it this way. Before I was writing, I was a songwriter and a musician.
oh,
So I
wow.
wrote I wrote a lot of songs and I've recorded 3 CDs. I've written, I don't know, 50, 75 songs.
Wow.
How did I write the songs? For me, the songs were just like downloads. The songs came from my emotions. And
Mm,
so when I would sit down to write a song or the lyrics to a song, they would just come. Like I would just sort of be in a I would clear my mind, and I would just like, I mean, look at somebody like Bob Dylan as a
mm,
songwriter. Now you listen to his lyrics, you read his lyrics. It's
mm,
clear as day that he literally was getting information coming from the great unconscious, from the cosmos, call it whatever you want. But he was just like somebody he was channeling. So he opens himself to his to the to the consciousness, and it
mm.
starts to flow through him. And
Wow.
that's how so much art gets created. It just comes.
Wow.
It gets downloaded. So many times for me, I would just, like, before I would go to sleep, I would be pondering these ideas. And before I knew it, like when I'd wake up in the morning, I would have information. Information would be there. It would come through my consciousness as I was
Wow.
sleeping, dreaming. And then I'd sit down to write an article, and all of a sudden, stuff would just come through me. I'd look at it on the page. I go, who wrote that? I'm thinking, like, did I write that? Wait a second. And then I go back and read it later. Or even when I pick up my book, I pick up my book now and I go, who wrote this book? Did I write all this stuff? How did I do that? It's like it comes through. Like, I think it comes through the artist. So many times I would just like try to clear my mind and just like let myself be in the moment and go with the flow. And oftentimes, great stuff would come as a result of it. It's kind of like just finding your way into that flow state, I think, is the thing that sometimes we struggle with as writers, because
Yeah.
sometimes we feel like it's just choppy. I mean, you know what it's like. You're a writer, and it's just sometimes it's hard work. Other times it's easy when you get
Mm,
into the flow state.
absolutely.
Uh, I mean, that's what do you think? I mean, what's been your experience with this?
I love your take on that, yeah, and I find it to be very relatable because sometimes you'll be like, how did I get the time to write it? I mean, how possible? Did I really wrote this? Because sometimes, yeah, I think that got into the question you made mention of how do you get inspirations and ideas? It's sometimes it's very surprising even to the author himself that I never knew I wrote this. I mean, it's quite impressive. Like, when did I do this? Like sometimes it's very hard to particularly point that this is where it's coming from. I know you mentioned a bit that okay, they come to you through dreams, yeah. And some other people will say, yeah, I get ideas from what I've seen around me, what I've, the
Hmm.
story of other people that I've heard through conversation I heap drops on, from the
Hmm.
story or life story of friends, my own personal experiences, from the dreams I have when I go to bed, etc. And they were like, it's amazing, really, because I cannot really say particularly where these words are coming from and you getting to see your book afterward, be like, this is amazing. I never believe I wrote this because this is very awesome. It happens to me sometimes too that whenever I go
Yeah.
back to, especially my old works that are typically very sad, I'm like, really, did I wrote? What was I passing through that made me write that? Well, I'm like, well, I'm excited I did wrote that because I cannot write things like that in this current status because time
Hmm.
evolves, time changes. Yeah, but it's always an amazing experience, really. It's an amazing experience. And I do relate with you. I can relate with what you've said so
Yeah.
far about
Yeah.
questioning how exactly did I wrote this? Did I really wrote this?
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, the other thing that if I do we have a few more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the other thing that I think about as a writer is some of the material that we could write about is so
Yeah.
close to us that we
Mm.
look through it. We don't sometimes we think there's nothing there, like
Mm.
something that we might be doing or something we might be involved in. And we think, nobody would
Absolutely.
be interested in that, or
Mm.
and yet a lot of the material it is there. And if we sort of it's just accept it and are okay with that, well, I think we'll
Mm.
find that the things that maybe we've experienced in our life that
Mm.
to us are, well, it's just part of my life. I did it. It's no big deal. However, but it's probably unique compared to what somebody else has
Yes.
experienced. So
Yeah.
they might find real value in it. So
Absolutely.
so so that's also something I'm aware of. I
Wow.
oftentimes if I take a walk or something, I'll think like, so what's been happening lately? What am I experiencing? What's there that if I paid attention to it more, I might find something to write about.
Mm.
And sometimes it's just slowing down enough to notice these little things. So that's another piece for me. And I think the other piece that you mentioned is sometimes just noticing what's going on around us. Like
Mm.
you might just be sitting in a coffee shop and you might notice somebody come in. They might have a conversation with someone. Something might happen. You might
Yeah.
react to it. There's a story there. Um,
Absolutely.
right? Um, I wrote an article one time because uh, where I live in Scotland, I'm separated from there's a 2 mile wide river between the town that I live in and the main
Mm.
town. I live in a small town. There's a big town, right? I'm in the big
Mm.
town, and the bridge was shut down because somebody went to the bridge and wanted to jump off the bridge. And so
Wow.
they shut the bridge down. So I couldn't get home for a couple of hours. So I went to a nearby restaurant and I started writing an article about just what was going on and published it on Medium. And it was basically about, well, how lucky am I in that eventually I did get home that night.
Wow.
The bridge did open and I got home. However, that person on the bridge never made it home, you
Wow.
know? And so it was a reflective piece of, like, just being grateful for the little things in
Mm.
life.
Wow.
when you see that there's so much suffering, around us.
Mm,
And sometimes if we just pay attention to the little things in our own life, we realize, wow, I have a lot to be
mm,
thankful for. And
absolutely.
and that fills us, and that gives us satisfaction and peace and contentment, just
Mm,
realizing how fortunate we are. And when people read that article, they were very moved by that, and but I didn't think I was going to write that article that day.
absolutely. Yeah.
That just happened, man. It just happened,
Happens.
came out of the blue.
Mm,
So that's maybe that's helpful for some of the listeners that are writers. Just, these things that we experience can often be great content, great sources of
for other
content. Just
people.
by living life, we notice, we observe, we see, we
Yeah.
pay attention. Yeah.
Wow, that's very amazing. I like the fact you mentioned. I have a lot to be thankful for. I have a lot to be grateful for. That's very amazing. And I love your answers to these questions. They're quite educative, inspiring, motivating,
Mm.
quite awesome to me. Thank you so much, Don, for sharing. And just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview, I would love to get a copy of your book. On what platform is it available on for purchase?
Yeah, they can. It's on it's on Amazon in uh, in many countries. I'm not sure if it's in every country, but it's on certainly on Amazon. It's also it can be found in major bookstores. You might have to order it, but they have access to it. There's Kindle versions available as well.
Mm,
And more information can be found on my website, which is bemoreconscious.com, bemoreconscious.com. And there's information about the book and about the me on that website there. And if you go to that website, you can join my newsletter, which comes out every now and then, and
mm.
I'll give bits and pieces of information on there too about the book, and also my podcast that I host. There's information about that podcast. Can be found on Amazon as well, called Living a Conscious Life. That's the name of the podcast, and you can
Amazing.
find that on Spotify, Amazon, and iTunes.
That's amazing. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Donald Johnson books directly on
Yeah.
Amazon and also another platform on his website too. I also left a link to social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Don, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I must say that it's very wholesome, educative, inspiring, and very great having this lovely conversation with you around your book and several other things we've touched today. This is very amazing, very educative, and I love it heartedly. Thanks for coming on.
Peter, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I call you as well. Thank you.